Okay, I'm going to turn to the next speaker now. Actually, it's a collective. It's a collaboration. So we have two people from London, Chantelle McDonald and Greg Nash. Chantelle is the Director of Service at London Cares. Chantelle has been a leader within the homelessness sector for over a decade. Greg has 28 years experience in social, health, and human services, including working in youth and adult mental services, infectious disease, sexual health, primary care, and oral health. He is a co-animator of the Right Clinic, Safer Opioid Supply, Health Outreach Mobile Engagement, and the Newcomer Clinic, or Newcomer Clinic. I'm not sure if I had that correct, Greg. So Greg and Chantelle, I'll turn it over to you both to carry on. Thank you.
Good evening, all. Wonderful to have this much interest in this subject matter. It is a pressing issue in communities across our region, our province, and our country. Thanks for the introduction, Rob. Just start by giving you a bit of an overview of where we're at in London. London has, like Kitchener-Waterloo, has a severe housing crisis. The rental market has skyrocketed in the past few years. COVID uncovered a lot of the dysfunction in our systems that were supporting people who are marginalized in community. And also, at the same time, we've had a significant rise in rental costs. So just in the past 3 years, our rental rates have tripled. Housing in the past five, housing costs have tripled in the past 5. The whole of community's response that was started through the Health and Homelessness Initiative in London was really a space that was amplified by this desperation on our street, not just by people with lived and living experience, but also by the service providers and organizations providing service, the moral distress that was created, as well as that distress and desperation spilled across the community and was impacting all walks of life in London.
So in 2022, we had over 2,000 individuals on our city's by name list that were experiencing homelessness within London, and we had about 600 of those individuals that were identified as having complex needs and living outdoors. To be honest, the system within London was breaking, and we were stretched beyond capacity. Approximately 75 individuals supported through the homelessness system were dying annually. So street level opioid poisoning was at an all-time high. Our city's frontline staff were becoming really first responders to these crises that we were seeing on our streets. Our frontline staff, Greg alluded to, moral injury was really the norm for them. And so begun a hunger strike. So I'm sure some folks around this table have seen that in the news, that there was a hunger strike implemented and orchestrated at City Hall in London. And the demand was for camps and tents to stop being dismantled the way that they were, and for adequate indoor space to be provided for individuals that were living outdoors. The hunger strike grew in momentum, resulting in a lot of community organizations creating and writing support letters to support what is called the Forgotten 519. And then the City of London and Forgotten 519 came to an agreement surrounding tent dismantling and indoor space.
So a year ago, November in 2022, we held a closed door summit. More than 200 individuals came, some with living and living experience across many, many sectors. 70 organizations were represented by community health, social services, institutional healthcare, education, emergency services, businesses, economic development associations, as well as land and housing developers at these 3 closed door meetings. And I can't emphasize this enough. London had got to the point where the entire community was suffering and said, this is enough. Enough is enough. Something has to change. At that point, we were experiencing 600 plus people sleeping rough every night on the streets, approaching 4,000 people who had some level of precarity of homelessness, and the situation was getting worse. The human suffering became untenable, and it was impacting everyone in the London community as homelessness was spreading across the entire city and encampments were springing up everywhere. This coming together with the three meetings did two major things. One is it named and identified the issue, and we agreed on what the issue was, and that was quintessential. The second was we put together these value statements, how we will practice and move forward, not just together, but in lockstep with the community.
So from those summit meetings, we co-designed a new system for London, which includes hubs and housing. So I don't think Greg and I mentioned that we're co-chairs of the encampment table through the whole of community response in London. So those are our roles and why we're presenting together. There's different implementation tables and different models throughout, or different sections throughout this model. For the hubs, really the whole premise is there's no wrong door. We want to serve individuals with complex need. Our goal is for folks to stop dying on our street. So no wrong door for referrals into our hub locations. It could be self, it could be first responders, agencies, business owners, all connecting into hubs and housing that we're growing within London. So there's core functions within a hub that each hub model will need to implement. A lot of them, including that wraparound care that we spoke about earlier. I think Jamie mentioned it. They're 24-hour safe spaces. So some of the hubs are population specific. So right now, the hubs that are starting to operationalize in London, one is Indigenous specific and one is youth specific. Through the hubs and housing plan, we're also building out housing. So deeply affordable housing for individuals experiencing deep poverty, as well as highly supportive housing. So right now, within the first year of this plan, we have about 100 highly supportive housing units within London. London Cares implemented some of those as well as Indwell. So again, both of those require the wraparound support from our health partners to be successful in supporting those folks with the most complex needs within our city.
So where are we now? We have had, as mentioned, had increased supports at the street level. We're starting to implement hubs and housing, and that's really the structure that through health and homelessness we created. There's three core structural elements to it. Improved services, access and services in encampments, those sleeping rough, building out of hubs that are transitional spaces that look much different than a shelter. They include wraparound supports that encompass health, mental health, substance use, and social services all in one location. It's a multi-service, multi-sectoral approach to providing services to those with the most complex needs in our community, and then building out highly supportive housing. That highly supportive housing looks similar to hubs with the level of support, but that would be a bit of a step down approach to the intensity of what's being offered in the hubs. We recognize in London that this will take years to build out. This is not an overnight solution. So when you see the graph on the right, the bottom axis, the horizontal axis, represents time. And that represents somewhere between 3 to 5 years, we estimate, to build this out completely. And then the vertical axis, the axis on the left, is the intensity and the resource required. So you can see that outreach or encampments are our first step out the door, how we're trying to improve service delivery to address this issue and really build communities of support, ecosystems of support. We're first out of the gate, and that'll be the most intensive and require the most investment of time and energy over the next few years, followed by the development of hubs. We have 2 hubs underway being developed, a youth hub and an Indigenous focused hub and a youth hub. And our first highly supportive housing have just recently come out of the gate, and we continue to look for investments in those to be increased. There's a lot of momentum, especially with our business and development community. 4 of the biggest developers in the region have committed to working with agencies to get spaces, appropriate spaces, accessible spaces built out as quickly as possible. And I should have also said multi-dimensional spaces as well.
So a bit of background in regards to encampments within London. So the first encampment meeting throughout the whole of community response happened April 2023, end of April. Greg and I had operationalized our plan with community by July 1st. So we were moving quickly and operationalizing things. And that's because the desperation within London, we had folks dying on our streets. Overdoses, toxicity of the street drug supply was really bad. Violence in our community, harm to volunteers, support staff, the hopelessness and desperation for unsheltered residents themselves was increasing. So even peer-to-peer violence, we were seeing an increase. I think Jamie mentioned some theft as well, and we were seeing indicators of that. So our numbers of encampments rose significantly. When we started tracking encampments at London Cares in 2015, I think I was tracking about 50 camps. That is significantly different than what we're tracking now. We have lists of camps within London that are diverted. So again, we wouldn't act on those encampments or supported encampments. We'll go through a bit about that. But through collaboration, short-term goals were identified, increased coordination and communication for our outreach teams in London, and then decrease that desperation within community. How we were doing that was providing a right-based approach to this work within encampments.
So one of the first things we did out of the gate with the whole of community is put together safety guidelines, recognizing the court case in Waterloo and Kingston and the emerging one in Hamilton, which some of our medical professionals had provided expert testimony at the Superior Court through affidavits and direct testimony. We recognized that we needed to shift and start to embrace the a rights-based approach for everyone in our community. That was not the case previous to this. Like many communities, bylaw was starting to enact, moving people along at 7 in the morning. By 8 or 9, people who had set up shelter, temporary shelter the night before, had to pick up all their belongings, often losing things or having things stolen. That instability was created. And what we were seeing is the deprivation and increased acuity of people's mental health, and biomedical conditions. Recognizing we couldn't sanction encampments or create a permit process, we did 2 things. Where can people stay that multi-use areas would not be impacted? You'll see this map here. There was 13 public use spaces, parks, that were identified as places that encampments would be moved within 24 hours if set up in these spaces. The reason these parks were identified is because they are multi-use parks. They have weekend events or regular events in them, splash pads, pools, significant playgrounds, schools within that space. All the other public use spaces are not sanctioned for use, but as long as the safety guidelines on the previous slide are followed around human trafficking, violence and threats or aggression, weapons, pets, fires, cleanliness, underage individuals, the size of gathered encampments, and the camp locations based on the map on the previous side, then bylaw would have latitude, as long as there was no significant complaints, to allow the people to self-shelter in those spaces. Not only would we allow them to self-shelter, but outreach and mobile medical services would start to provide a continuity of care and services in those spaces.
There's significant impact to moving individuals within encampments that impact people's health. It was also increasing the desperation. So folks within our community, since COVID, didn't have a washroom to utilize, right? That's a huge impact for not only folks living in encampments, business owners, folks trying to use park space or sidewalks. Desperation on the street were growing because bylaw and had the unfortunate job of coming in saying, you have to move along at 7 a.m. I don't have a place to go. Shelters are full. 75 friends of mine have passed away this year, and now you're telling me to move my camp. The hopelessness was continuing to grow. So when Greg and I started to co-chair the encampment strategy, Greg suggested the National Protocol for Homelessness Encampments in Canada. Taking a look at this report, it's right-based, it made a lot of sense to us, and we wanted to use some guidelines from here. So what we started to do was think about ways that we could implement guidelines from here and work with folks within our implementation table that were community partners to see how we would make this happen. So how we decided to do this within London is add service depots, is what we call them, that are 4 adjacent spots to a river where a lot of folks camp. What we do within those locations is offer service at a consistent time every single day. So really it's just a post in the ground with an outhouse there, which people can utilize. It's serviced every other day. They come and service the porta potty. Every single day at the same time, outreach teams will show up. They'll offer clean drinking water. They'll offer food and hygiene equipment. They'll offer fire safety education. We've also had the benefits of working closely with our fire department. Sometimes fire might come and educate folks. Fire safety might look like handing out that warm survival gear to individuals. Waste management is really tough when you're living outdoors. City of London got behind this and they have waste management solutions for folks in encampments. They come, I think, every other day and pick up people's waste and dispose of it. Food, again, when we're supplying food, it's breakfast, lunch, and snacks for individuals within those encampments. And then the social support. So connecting individuals to resources in that community, whether it be health, mental health supports. It could be through our home bus that will come out to folks, justice supports, whatever that individual needs in the moment. And then of course, resources to support harm reduction, bio bins, harm reduction that folks might need if they are using. And then this service depot really connects folks, connecting individuals by relationship building with different outreach groups that will then hopefully follow these individuals and warm transfer them into the hubs and the highly supportive housing that we're building out in London.
So we connected, as you can imagine, residents, community at large had concerns about this approach. What does it mean to sanction encampments? We want to be really clear, we're not experts in this space. We're, like all of you and many across the country, trying to figure out a different approach. What was working what we were doing in the past wasn't working, so we're trying something different. We immediately went to community consultation and then wrapped around some evaluation, just initial service data and pre and post surveys from residents to address the concerns and see if this is working. We had some pretty good results. Residents around encampments who had service depots placed in the area found less of what we call the hustle happening in their neighborhood, less aggression and violence happening because of the desperation. Is that scientific or empirical? No. We did this in about 3 months over the summer just to get a sense of what was happening. You'll note the amount of basic needs supplies that were handed out just in a very short period of time, 66,510. So really what we were doing is augmenting that desperation and making sure people had their basic needs met to alleviate some of that. That was our first step out the gate.
Right now, Greg and I in community, because we didn't start with creating an encampment strategy, because we wanted to operationalize because of the desperation. Now our next step is creating an encampment strategy with the help of ORCode.
There's a lot of very interesting information there that you guys shared. How can someone get access to that presentation, or maybe you could drop something into the chat?
I put in the chat the Movement for Change. That is the website hosted by our City of London. And really, it's the whole of community response. It's not just the city. It is the 90+ organizations that are part of the Movement of Change or the whole of community response. I noticed some others put the national protocol in, and I've got teed up the recent advocates report, unless that's already been put in, but that's a key piece that's guiding us. I also noticed someone had a question, an important question. Has our city adopted the definition of human rights for encampments? We haven't, but that is the strategy we're working for. First, a framework, as well as a values system, how we move forward. And there are some really practical pieces that we anticipate having out by June. The why, how, and what of a human rights-based strategy would look like. Again, we're new to this. We are not experts. We know what is happening isn't working, and we've heard that throughout the presentations tonight.
Greg, Chantelle, I encourage anyone that's watching, if they're interested in getting more information about what's happening in London. I was certainly intrigued about what was going on, and having had a chance to speak to you earlier about it. I really appreciate you sharing what's going on in London, because out of all of this, all of these ideas and concepts, hopefully people will be able to adapt strategies that work for their community. The other thing that I just got thinking about as you were talking about this, and it was early on, I think in Chantelle's comment, was I think about the trauma that people who are working in this space also feel, especially when you have so many young people who get into the field of social work or what have you, and dealing with these situations and like what Jamie was describing, how difficult that is. Not only are we concerned about the mental health of the people that are suffering homelessness, but those that are trying to assist as well go through trauma, and we really need to consider that too in terms of the care that people that are working in this space require. So
we're already having a health human services crisis, and adding to that, we're starting to have a social services human crisis because the work is so tough. And when you don't have solutions for people, how do you keep showing up every day and doing that?
Especially in this field that's decades in the making and will be many years in the fixing, and it's hard to maintain that.